Hey man, it's Jason Narvy, Skull from Power Rangers. We're out here in the country today. Come on, I want to talk to you. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know you're doing your reviews of Lost Galaxy. And I want you to understand, there ain't no skull in Lost Galaxy. What kind of person are you? Well, God, okay, there's a little bit of skull in Lost Galaxy, okay? We're going out in the woods. I'm gonna leave you out here. There's a little bit of skull in Lost Galaxy. Like, I don't know if you noticed this or not. If you look at the Pink Ranger, look really closely at her helmet. You look at the nose. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Okay, so other than that, there's no skull in Lost Galaxy. I'm gonna leave you here.
In the last of this series, we had a nice surprise, with two strong entries in Power Rangers in Space and Seiju Sentai Mega Ranger. Now, I was going to mix things up a bit from this point, as technically speaking, that was the end of what we initially set out to do, as it rounded off the Zordon era of Power Rangers that started way back with the original Mighty Morphin series. And indeed, it was originally thought that Power Rangers in Space would be the last season, so it felt like we were at a fitting end. However, seeing as this was requested so much, and there were still some unanswered questions of where do we go from here, it makes sense to venture once more into the land of overthinking and ask the question, Power Rangers Lost Galaxy and Seiju Sentai Gingaman, what's the difference? Now, first off, we need to establish whether or not Lost Galaxy is a continuation of the story so far or not. And technically speaking, yes, it is. However, it's not as simple as that. You see, Power Rangers in Space was a big blowout ending, so Lost Galaxy ended up being a bit of a retcon series where they squeezed elements of the last season into this one of which is somewhat tragic, but we'll get onto that. But essentially it's still part of a new era, where it's predominantly a new team and new beginnings each season. What came before it is still canon, but it's less of a continuation. This series was required as kind of a bridge between those two ways of producing the American show. Now, at the end of Power Rangers in Space, the Rangers are headed back to Earth, but when we get to the beginning of Lost Galaxy, it's kind of ignored, but it does come up later. So, without any further ado, let's dive in. The scene is set with an old man telling the story of Quasar Sabers that have been lying in wait for worthy heroes for the last 3,000 years. Very Sword in the Stone-esque. But alas, none of these woodland villagers are seemingly worthy enough and are unable to extract the swords. However, the ceremony is interrupted by a bunch of cockroach, scorpion-like things and a coconut-headed monster who clearly needs to pay more attention in class. Interestingly, we've technically seen this monster before. This is actually Dr. Hinera from the previous season, but I kind of glossed over it in the previous video as it passed pretty quickly. You see, as he's dying, Hinera goes through various changes, one of them being a monster form, but it's so brief that it wasn't really worth mentioning. The suit has been modified slightly, but it's definitely him. We cut to a space station that looks like a cross between something from Star Trek and the bottled city of Kandor. The crew are preparing to head out in search of a new world, although no real explanation of why they're doing that, nor does it seem to have any connection to the Space Rangers, Dark Spectre, or indeed anything we saw in Countdown to Destruction. We don't actually even know when this is set. The show starts by saying the not-too-distant future, which is probably how you would explain why it's not directly connected to what came before it. We're meant to assume that we've taken a jump forward in time, although presumably not too far, because otherwise seasons that came after this would also have to be in the future too, and I'm already scared that my mind might start melting trying to figure out how on earth all these future crossovers might work, and we've barely got past the first set of opening credits, so let's not play devil's advocate for too long, let's just move on. I suppose we can assume that maybe some space technology was given to Nasada, or something, because clearly there's been a giant leap in technology. in a fairly short amount of time too, because Bulk, Skull and, annoyingly, Professor Phononymous are still around. So this must still be pretty soon after the Z-Wave. There's some palaver about passports, and this guy is clearly missing one. Also, an old lady is then mugged for hers, only the brooding emo guy manages to fool the muggers into taking an empty envelope by slipping the passport into his bag, even though the continuity of the scene is so bad that she had it in her hand the whole time anyway, before he can even give it back to her. This is a tricky start. Anyway, we learn that some shuttles are leaving for a new world, and only certain people were selected. Cut back to the space station, and wait, is that Archie from CSI? It is Archie! We then cut back again to Earth, where our saviour of back alley grannies, do not Google that, because there's no way it's not porn, manages to sneak aboard the shuttle despite not having a passport, probably because the security guard that spotted him describes him as a teenager when the actor who played him was coming up to his 26th birthday. Not to mention, that is definitely Lord Zed. Luckily, the passengers don't need a spacesuit to go into space, because science.
Yes, science!
They all arrive at the space station, but of course, Skull has slept in and missed his flight. I'd like to think that Bulk and Skull were selected to join the venture to the New World based on their heroics against Astronomer, but it's never actually mentioned. And in fact, Skull is written off the show at this point as he left to continue higher education, and had probably not made plans to be involved beyond the end of Power Rangers, as In Space was meant to finish it all off. Ignore the fact that there's blue sky being shown in a space lobby, and our stowaway is able to escape by pretending to be one of these Starship Trooper cadets, and is then whisked away for training on the moon. Ignore the fact that there's mountains and an outdoor runway inside of a space station. It does sort of get explained, but at this point the audience is none the wiser to this, and it makes no sense whatsoever. They commence their combat training on the moon, which now has gravity and oxygen. Zordon probably made it?
Yes, science!
Our stowaway manages to save a woman that we now know as Kendricks from an explosion, but Archie, or should I say Kai, is not happy to see him, nor is this guy Mike, who is apparently the stowaway, or Leo's, big brother, despite the fact that the actor who plays him is actually 5 years younger than our leading man, because Hollywood. All of a sudden there's a tear in the space-time continuum, presumably, and a member of the Forest People lands on the moon at the feet of our future Rangers. Not that the brothers seem to think this is odd in the slightest. She's then pursued by the Cockroach Dudes, or Stingwingers, who make an about turn once they spot the big guns and fly back to where they came from. They ask the girl who she is, and thankfully she speaks English, so is able to explain that her name is Maya and she comes from the planet Miranoi. I'm just doing some extra research on Maya for the video.
It's not gonna happen, Matt.
Maya heads back through the portal with Mike and Kendricks, but Leo manages to slip away from Kai and heads through too. However, Kai is angry at himself for leaving them, and formulates a plan when he finds a flyer for the Astro Megaship Museum. The megaship that formed one of the Megazords from Power Rangers in Space, and the supposed means of transport back to Earth for the Space Rangers. So, how long has passed? And is this on display on Earth? In which case, how did Kai get back to Earth? Kai attempts to commandeer the ship, only Damon, the ship's mechanic, and Alpha 6 aren't convinced and ask to see his orders. Not having any, he does his best to convince them to let him try, but eventually Damon just takes control and they head out in search of a portal to go after Maya and the others. In a battle with Coconut Head, or Furio as we later learn he's called, Mike is able to pull one of the Quasar Sabers from the stone, followed by Maya, Kendricks, Kai and Damon. Angry that he can't have the Quasar Sabers for himself, Furio begins to destroy Miranoi. Mike falls to his doom but is able to pass the saber onto Leo, and we move on to our first morph sequence. But after a short battle sequence, they're all forced to flee in the Astro Megaship, as Furio's death wave, or whatever it is, continues to ravage the planet, turning everything to stone. They manage to make it back through the portal and head for the GSA space station. It appears Furio also made it through, but is under orders from a greater villain, Scorpius, and to a lesser extent his daughter Trakeena. which I feel is a bit of a lost opportunity to revive the Scorpius character from the Mighty Morphin era. Scorpius and Trakeena aren't Sentai characters, so if you wanted a way to link it back to previous seasons, and if you're making the main villain a Scorpion-like character, although I'm not entirely sure the writers know what a Scorpion looks like, you could have come up with some way in which Scorpion survived and wants revenge on the Rangers. After all, Zordon's good energy was meant to rid the universe of all evil, but it clearly missed all the villains from this show, so there must have been a way to escape it. Realistically, you need to explain that anyway, by them being from another universe or another dimension, maybe. We do eventually get an explanation of what happened to Scorpiona in Power Rangers Hyperforce. It states that Scorpiona went into hiding and was unaffected by the Z-Wave. This isn't considered canon though, and there's also explanations in the comic books, but these are only semi-canon to the TV show, so either way we don't really know what happened, so there's no reason you couldn't revive the character with a new actress here. By episode 3, I'm already confused. The space station is meant to have started its search for a new world, so Kai and Kendricks are back on board, while it looks like Damon, Leo and Maya are all on Earth, which would make sense. But are they? Maya hears a distant cry for help, so they decide to steal the Astro Megaship and set off from the space station. So they can't be on Earth, because how would they get back to the space station? But Damon wasn't one of those that was chosen to go aboard. Leo doesn't have a passport and is actively wanted as a stowaway, and Maya isn't even from Earth, but this appears to still be the space station, which is very confusing at this point because they're outside. This will get cleared up as we go on, but at this early point in the show, it's really hard to just accept that this is how the space station looks. Anyway, Maya is able to hear which planet the cry for help is coming from, by somehow hearing the sound waves that are travelling through the vacuum of space.
Yes, science!
So they head down to find what we can assume is going to be our new Zords, being guarded by an Elvis lobster. The beasts are released, and oh god, what nightmare fuel is that? In retaliation, Scorpius orders Furio to attack the space station, and by this point I think we need to just accept that the space station is somehow able to function like the bottled city of Kandor, as it's clearly able to emulate atmosphere and weather, a bit like the ship in WALL-E or the dome in The Truman Show. As soon as you go through the outer perimeter, it looks like you're outside, on Earth, even though you're not. It's only right at the end that we actually get a true sense of what this looks like, but we'll come back to that. Although it does seem a bit weird when you switch from the US footage, which has vehicles that are made to look a bit futuristic, to Japanese footage where it's clearly just Earth. Unlike in previous seasons, the monsters don't need help to grow giant. The lobster Greaser is able to do it himself with the aid of a potion, which brings the Galacta beasts to the Rangers' rescue. Maya is able to understand them and explains that the beasts are able to combine their powers with the Galaxy Rangers' powers. Or I suppose technically we should call them the Quasar Rangers, because they get their power from the Quasar Sabers, like the Zeo Rangers get their powers from the Zeo Crystal, but they're never called that. In episode 4, Leo is somehow accepted into the GSA, but ends up being taken by a monster when he fails to lock up the arsenal of weapons. Furio attempts to destroy the Quasar Sabers, but they can only be wielded by those that were chosen. Leo does the old switcheroo to make the monsters think that they've managed to destroy them, and unveil the location of some new weapons, the Trans Daggers, which aren't just daggers, they're able to transform Trans Daggers into other forms of weapon too, each with their own ability and a new combined attack. But by the end of the episode, Leo resigns from GSA, so what was the point of all of that? Episode 5 introduces the Jet Jammers, a means of transporting between the Astro Megaship and Terra Venture. Also, the Galacta Beasts are nearly destroyed after being turned into stone, but the combination of the Rangers, the Beasts and the Trans Daggers is able to transform them into Zords, and they do call them Zords, even though there's no indication that they're connected to Zordon, and combine to form the new Galaxy Megazord, which really should be the Quasar Mega Mech? And new tech just keeps getting introduced all of the time. In episode 6, we then get some motorbikes called the Astrocycles, and then the Quasar launchers in episode 7, but it's never really explained why these are needed. Of course we know the answer is 'cause toy sales, but they never really do that much. Besides, the Red Ranger gets a big upgrade later on anyway. But anyway, it's not important for now, because what is important is Mike isn't dead. They manage to rescue him, and he tells them of the lights of Orion, the source of a great power hidden in a cave. But it was all a trap, and it wasn't Mike at all, it was a monster in disguise. So maybe he is dead? But the lights disappear somehow, and we transition into some filler episodes while they search for them. In episode 9, Leo fights Furio for the lights, and is saved by someone who looks a bit like the Phantom Ranger, but with bullhorns. This is apparently the Magna Defender, who 3,000 years ago released the lights of Orion, but was defeated and fell deep into the Earth, or whatever planet it was, and I think we can guess which one. In this episode they also make a switch to using some early CG versions of the Zords, mixed in with the more traditional effects. Apparently Scorpius destroyed the Magna Defender's planet and killed his son Zika. Definitely not a popular baby name these days. Magna Defender has his own Zord in the form of Toro Zord. Again, they call it a Zord regardless of any connection to Zordon. He's also able to make himself transform into a giant form to fight alongside the Toro Zord. It too can transform into the Defender Toro Zord, which is essentially like a mech exoskeleton or a suit of armour, or in essence another Megazord. As a side note, quite often in the show everyone is outside, and we don't always know whether it's meant to be on Terra Venture or another planet. But most of the times they are on Terra Venture, but the monsters and others are able to just get on board without any of the crew noticing. And then the Rangers are forced to go fight them without any support from the Starship Trooper-style soldiers that are meant to be highly trained to take on alien enemies. But rather than trying to destroy Terra Venture, sometimes the monsters almost try to go unnoticed. If they're able to infiltrate Terra Venture so easily, why don't they just go for an all-out attack? Now at first it's because they think the lights of Orion have somehow been transported into the ground there. But beyond that, they could easily destroy it. It seems to have almost no security, and no one could survive an attack. They're too far from Earth, which they even mention in one episode. In episode 11, a monster is able to freeze every single person in the colony, including the crew, the Rangers, and Alpha. Although the Red Ranger is somehow able to avoid the effects of the attack thanks to his brother's dog tags around his neck. Which, by the way, he only seems to wear when the plot requires it. It's definitely not a thing that he wears all the time. And also Kai and Kendrick should also have GSA dog tags that would protect them. And why would GSA dog tags protect them anyway? And when did Mike pass these on? When he was falling? Is Mike the only member of the crew with GSA dog tags? What is going on here?
Yeah. Well, whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Seemingly the Magna Defender has also not fallen victim to it either, and neither have any of the animals. So Leo goes after the monster that caused it all on horseback, but the Magna Defender had given the monster decoy lights to try and lead him back to where Scorpius is, and the show is starting to lose me here. It's not that it's bad, there's just so many things that are clearly not connecting, and the non-stop cheesy hero music is driving me insane. The start of the series was really good, but a lot of what we're seeing now is just dumb. Like, why would ancient powers be hidden in sunflower statues on a space base that's only existed for a few years? Or priceless treasure be buried there? Neither of which have any form of protection from someone turning up and trying to steal them. Granted, both of these things are from Gingaman footage, but still, it's just dumb, and there's no attempt to try and have any of it make sense. I mean, Episode 12 is centred around Maya and Kendrick's fighting because Maya ate Damon's birthday cake that Kendrick's made. Seriously, that's the main plot. Obviously there's a monster of the week trying to find the lights, which eventually leave the colony, but then it's just padding to the real cake-based drama. Especially as the episode ends with Maya saying that the lights will be back someday, and then they return at the start of the very next episode. So the cake thing is the whole plot. Trakeena continues to play a Loki-style role, playing tricks behind her father's back and sabotaging his plans. But it turns out, like the Quasar Sabers, the lights of Orion can't be taken, they must choose who they go to, as they can only be used for good. So the Rangers get a power upgrade, but it's a bit half-baked because it only works if all 5 of the Rangers power up at the same time, but it does also power up the Megazord as well. Finally, in episode 15, Scorpius realises that he can just attack Terra Venture, After all, he can't get the Lights of Orion anymore. But Magna Defender decides that he's willing to destroy everyone in order to have his revenge. Only the Torazord refuses to let him go through with it and walks away. But anyway, it's not important for now, because what is important is Mike's not dead. Again. Well, sort of. While it's been teased for a while that the Magna Defender is Mike, Leo's brother, it's actually that he stole Mike's life force in order to be able to escape the crevasse on Miranoi, as Mike just happened to fall into the same one that the Magna Defender had just spent the last 3,000 years, so Mike now lives on inside him. The spirit of Zika visits him to try and convince him to leave revenge behind, and he sacrifices himself to save everyone, but somehow revives Mike. With Mike back, Leo feels that Mike is the true Red Ranger, but Mike refuses to take on the power, claiming it was destiny for the saber to pass to Leo. As it looks like the Rangers are going to lose to a Monster of the Week, the spirits of the Magna Defender and Zika appear before Mike and pass the powers, as well as the Torazord, onto him, and then he's able to save them from destruction. But the Rangers are meant to be much more powerful than the Magna Defender, as the Lights of Orion chose them. You know, the things that the Magna Defender was desperate to try and find and felt completely defeated when he couldn't have them. The show often makes it feel like he's the most powerful, when in reality he should be much weaker as he doesn't have the lights. The Rangers do. By episode 17, Bulk and Professor Phenonymus reappear as waitstaff after being fired from the science division, but we don't really see much of them at all through this series. Incidentally, in this episode we also learn that Lord Zed now seems to be lying low on Terra Venture as a decorator. Seeing as he is now human and no one knows what he looks like, it could actually be him. Maybe he was demoted for letting a stowaway go. It ends with Trakeena refusing to enter a cocoon to metamorphosize into a creature like Scorpius, and so she ends up leaving his ship. And then we finally get back to the Starship Troopers and aliens-inspired side of the show, when Terra Venture picks up a distress signal and the troops, who have been noticeably absent for more than half a baker's dozen worth of episodes, go to investigate. And this part of the show is great. It's a complete tonal shift to a lot of what we've had to watch in the meantime. It's dark, it's gritty, it's suspenseful. This is your show. The ship they board is covered in slime and cobwebs, and the crew are either skeletons or they've been liquefied. Either way, they died a long time ago. The distress signal wasn't live, it was playing on a loop, and may have even been a trap, as an unknown life form is stalking them, causing the mission to be abandoned and the troops to start opening fire as something grabs one of them and drags him into the dark. Where did this come from? This is awesome. This is like a completely different show. This is what should have followed the first couple of episodes. The troops are all captured, including this guy, Jasper, an actor we've definitely seen before. So apparently Lord Zed got a promotion then. Despite their peril, they all manage to escape once the Rangers turn up. Meanwhile, Mike and Leo cause a distraction and attempt to retrieve a book that belonged to the captain. They blast a hole in the side of the ship and are somehow able to jump through a gap in space to the recovery vehicle, although the monster grabs onto Mike's leg and he's somehow able to survive in space until Kai saves him.
Yes, science!
Okay, that bit was a bit stupid, but I'm going to put it out there. This episode was awesome. They could have done a mid-season TV movie based on this, and I would have been hooked. In episode 19, we're introduced to a new character called Deviot, this Decepticon in a Regency ruff. Interestingly, this is also played by Ed Neal, the guy who played Lord Zed. It turns out that there's more than 5 Galactabeasts, there's actually 8, and despite not being able to read the book they retrieved from the ship, Kendricks identifies drawings of them in a torn page and realises that some attacking Zords are these missing Galactabeasts. They're little more than puppets though, and are being controlled by an evil remote control after being nearly destroyed 3,000 years ago. But just as they're about to destroy the Rangers, they remember who they are and join the side of the good guys. They're then able to be called upon as allies in future episodes. Trakeena resurfaces on the planet Onyx, in the same saloon that we saw in the previous season. It's here that we're introduced to Villamax, who saves Trakeena from a bar fight and agrees to train her to be as formidable as Scorpius wants her to be. You know what that means.
We're gonna need a montage. Ooh, it takes a montage.
She returns after her father was tricked into a battle with the Power Rangers by Deviot, as he wanted to enter the cocoon and take on the powers that were originally meant for Trakeena. Scorpius dies of his injuries and Trakeena takes command, but Deviot still wishes to take over and is at odds with Villamax, who is loyal to Trakeena but is still a nobleman deep down. He's a little bit like a Clipdur in the previous season. He finds himself on the side of evil, but isn't necessarily evil himself, it's just that he's loyal to a princess who is evil. This episode also includes a segment where the Red Ranger gratuitously rips off his shirt. You're welcome, mums? Skipping over a load of filler, in episode 29 we see a villain called Chameleac, who's able to analyse all of the Rangers' powers and replicate them, including the lights of Orion. This is similar to the Psycho Rangers in the previous season. The Rangers are able to confuse him by mixing up their movesets, which is a better idea than just painting themselves the same colour. But it doesn't really go anywhere, except for the fact that the Psycho Rangers are soon to make an appearance too. So far in the season, the show feels very disjointed. At times it feels like a successor to Power Rangers in Space, but quite a lot of the episodes feel quite disconnected, with little to no reason behind why things are the way that they are. That changes completely when we get to episode 30. Deviot manages to secure some data cards on the black market. With them, he's able to revive the Psycho Rangers, minus the Silver Ranger of course, because that was Zane. Trakeena has to quickly get them in line as they still want to go after the previous generation of Rangers, which she probably shouldn't be too hasty to do because Andros then appears, and Leo recognises him saying that he was there on Z-Day. So it can't have been too long ago, but where has he been? The Astro Megaship was on Earth, and the Rangers were meant to be too, but now the Astro Megaship is on Terra Venture, so where have they been? And how are they getting around space without the Astro Megaship? And where do they go after this? You'd think that the Rangers would be the first on the list to get passports for Terra Venture, but clearly not. However, Andros now manages to reappear despite not having his ship anymore, and Terra Venture apparently being so far from Earth that they couldn't reach it even if they wanted to. Then all of a sudden the rest of the Rangers, minus Zane, reappear, and hang on. When did Carlos get hench? And where have they been? This isn't like before, where it's hard to factor in future crossovers due to the nature of using Japanese footage. This is all bespoke footage. This could have been dealt with earlier. Why has it taken 30 episodes to get to this point? Because the idea is good, but it just feels like a throwaway crossover for the sake of it by shoehorning it in here. Also, I guess we're left to assume that Zane is still on Earth, which is fine, he could have chosen to stay behind, but then they explain later that all the Rangers were on Earth and Alpha sent out a distress signal which made them come to their rescue, and they can't stay long as they need to head back to Earth. So what is this?
We ventured 14 light years away. We couldn't get back to Earth now even if we had to.
How do you mess this up this badly? Anyway, they defeat the Psycho Rangers, except Psycho Pink somehow survives. When pursuing a sword that is supposedly more powerful than all of the Quasar Sabers combined, Psycho Pink nearly destroys Cassie's morpher and then turns into a monster with scorpion boobs on her shoulders, which then forces the Rangers to bring both the current Megazord and the Astro Megazord, ignore the fact that the Earth is in the background, to fight her. Which, incidentally, where is this footage from? This isn't from the Gingaman Mega Ranger crossover, we already covered that in the last video. So, is the US show now filming its own Megazord footage too? In the end, Kendrick sacrifices herself to save Cassie's powers, and is killed, becoming the first and only Power Ranger to be killed in the main TV series. In the real world, this is because the actress who played her, Valerie Vernon, was diagnosed with leukemia and had to leave the series to undergo treatment. The Rangers then all head off into space on the Galaxy Gliders. Even though Kendricks was killed, her Quasar Saber survived and is missing, apparently having fallen into the wrong hands on the planet Gwyneth. How did that happen? How did someone unworthy pick the saber from the ground? That's their whole thing. If you're going to base it on Excalibur or Thor's hammer, you can't just pick and choose when the rules are going to apply. The saber ends up at a weapons auction on Onyx, where whoa, what are Piranatrons doing there? If we're left to believe that the Z-Wave killed all the evil in the universe, this whole season is a bit of a stretch anyway, but absolutely no way should any of Divatox's minions be left. So you've got Piranatrons, and you've got someone unworthy holding up the sword. Astronomer reappears to claim the saber, but Trakeena sees through her and knows that she's actually Karone. But not only does she now have the Quasar saber, she's also able to yield it. As a side note, Karone's wardrobe for this season seems to be tight black leather, which I'm fine with. In fact, it's actually quite a clever choice. While she does become the Pink Ranger, she doesn't actually start dressing in pink. Instead, she maintains a wardrobe that is not too far away from the tight black catsuits that Astronomer wore. It may have also been a conscious decision from the producers, as it continues to honour Valerie Vernon as the true Pink Ranger for this series, as they continue to credit her in each episode, even when she was away from the show for treatment. After being thrown to her death by Trakeena, Karone is chosen to become the new Pink Ranger and is able to then stop Trakeena from using the pink Quasar saber against the Rangers. Why is she able to yield the Quasar saber? She's not worthy. And so, Karone officially joins the Ranger lineup. Technically speaking, Karone had already been a Ranger, but she was only an honorary Ranger. While she adopted the colour purple, she was never actually the Purple Ranger. Although, one theory is that she was originally meant to be the Yellow Space Ranger. We never really know who the KO-35 morphing braces were for. Andros and Zane were the only KO-35 humans that actually took up the brace. The rest were simply placed on the Astro Megaship. But traditionally in Power Rangers, the actual Rangers tend to wear the colours of the powers that they adopt. Andros is seen as a child in a red jumpsuit, and Karone is seen in the same jumpsuit, but in yellow. So it may be that she was originally going to be the Yellow Space Ranger, that is before she was kidnapped by Doc Honda. This could also be an explanation as to why her hair colour keeps changing throughout Power Rangers in Space. It's not only a reflection of her confusion over her identity, but also her attachment to colours, despite always wearing black. After all, she goes through the entire spectrum of Power Rangers colours: blue, black, red, yellow, or blonde at least, but oddly never pink, which you'd think could be foreshadowing to her later becoming the Pink Ranger, but it's just an interesting coincidence. Now, we have no idea where Karone has been all this time, nor do we know how she managed to get so far into space, nor do we know how the planet Onyx is somehow reachable from where they are, nor do we...
Wizard.
For blaming out.
Karone then goes through her own journey of discovery, but it's massively overshadowed when, in the same episode, we get a superpowered Red Ranger, which, to be fair, is a toy I would have wanted as a kid. In episode 35, in a scene reminiscent of when the inscriptions are read in the Book of the Dead in The Mummy, some of the Terra Venture scientists manage to decipher some of the writing in the Galaxy book, which sends out an energy pulse that is then tracked by its guardian. He manages to convince Kai to help him steal it back, but is later killed by Deviot. Deviot's able to use a spell from the book to become more powerful, now looking like something out of the Predator. The Rangers use some crystals given to them by the Guardian to defeat Deviot, and Kai becomes the new Guardian of the book. So in reality, that episode was mostly pointless, but it was designed to do two things. One was to serve as a means of explaining how Deviot now looked different, which they didn't really need to do because most of Deviot's footage is unique to the US show, so there's no real need to try and accommodate Japanese footage too much. But even then it's even more useless because the next time we see him, he gets transformed back into his old form. So actually the only important part of that episode was that it ends with the Kionta spell from the book causing Terra Venture to enter the Lost Galaxy.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Mike claims that they're not able to navigate as the computer isn't able to determine directions now that they're inside. Fair enough. But he also states that there's no stars to navigate by, even though the last shot before that literally shows a galaxy full of stars. All of a sudden, once inside the Lost Galaxy, we switch to a load of Japanese footage with characters that we'll remember from the Gingaman vs Mega Ranger crossover. And I think this pretty much sums it up.
There's a vessel approaching.
What kind of vessel?
Well, it's a castle sitting on a dinosaur flying towards us.
Normally I would skip over this kind of stuff, but This is actually quite relevant to the whole point behind these videos, which is to compare the two shows. So, here we go. This new villain, which we now know as Captain Mutiny, boards Terra Venture and introduces himself, claiming to come in peace and offers a gift of treasure. If you're going to lie, perhaps having Mutiny in your name is not such a good idea. They follow the captain back to his planet under the promise of a machine that'll help them get home, but obviously that's not his plan. The captain apparently captures spaceships and uses its crew as slaves to mine treasure, and the box that's supposed to contain the machinery actually contains this. I wonder if that's one of Ivan Ooze's monsters. Deviot somehow made it to the Lost Galaxy 2 and is now working for Captain Mutiny, and this whole thing is just a mess, chopping and changing between Japanese footage and new US footage. There's a whole thing with an Egyptian-looking monster called Hexuba, but it's all just glorified filler. Anyway, the dragon with a castle on its back, or Titanosaur, nearly succeeds in defeating the Megazords, but ends up overheating, so they remove the castle and set Titanosaur loose on Terra Venture. But this is where we come to a big problem again. Titanosaur is meant to be a massive spaceship, one big enough to carry a castle on its back. So when it comes to a battle like this, this is meant to be on Terra Venture, so how can something so massive take up so little space under the colony dome? The Rangers are able to reverse the counter spell by reading it backwards, rendering the whole thing with Captain Mutiny relatively pointless, especially as Trakeena instantly destroys him, although the Rangers do manage to free the slaves, but it's almost at the cost of Mike's life, as he sacrifices himself to hold back Captain Mutiny and then attempts to hold open the portal out of the Lost Galaxy as it starts to close, seemingly being destroyed. Which is all well and good trying to build some tension with the portal closing, except for the fact that they now have the power to both open and close it at will, so if it closes, they could just open it back up again. But anyway, that's not important for now, because what is important is Mike's not dead. Again, although he has lost his powers, Leo finds him floating in space, in nothing but a vest, and takes him back to Terra Venture, where he almost instantly recovers. Seriously? Science!
Yes, science!
Thus begins the three-part finale, with Deviot being recovered from the remains of Captain Mutiny's ship. Trakeena throws him into a holding cell, but it's where the cocoon has been put into storage. After a short fight, he ends up dragging them both into it, with Trakeena emerging as slightly enhanced. Meanwhile, Terra Venture is at a point where it can go on no longer and has to land. Fortunately, it's near a planet very similar to Earth. Its atmosphere glows green, even though its water reflects blue.
Yes, science!
And apparently it's only taken 212 days to get there. So you're telling me they had a whole ecosystem going with jobs, delivery companies, roadways, a horse ranch, and it lasted less than a year? And now, all of a sudden, enhanced Trakeena realises something that Scorpius did 30 episodes ago, and attacks Terra Venture directly, but the Red and Green Rangers attach a bomb to the ship and send it spiralling into space. But Terra Venture ends up crashing onto the moon that orbits the New World, with all of the smaller colony domes detaching from the main one, not to mention the main dome starts cracking. The captain calls for the ship to be evacuated, but hang on, what about the people in the lower parts of the ship, or the other domes? And how do they have enough shuttles to evacuate everyone? I mean, there's skyscrapers full of people, an entire city, possibly millions. And where are they launching from? In the show, they seem to be taking off from the runway, but this is inside the dome, which can't open because then it would destroy the atmosphere. Surely they'd have to take off from one of the ports, like the Astro Megaship does, but those are all below the dome, the part that's just been ripped off. And I don't quite know how to handle this next bit, but Trakeena attaches bomb vests to a load of stingwingers, and they end up suicide bombing buildings inside the dome, as well as the Megazords. Even pre-9/11, this is a bit much. However, Villamax has a change of heart when he can't bring himself to harm a young girl. He refuses to fire on innocent people, but he also can't bring himself to kill his student, and is in turn killed by Trakeena. The Rangers then use the self-destruct feature on the Astro Megaship to try and destroy the Scorpius ship, with the Rangers escaping with Alpha on the jet jammers. Most manage to reach the New World, although I assume only those under the main dome. But Leo crashes on the moon with nothing even close to a spacesuit. So why all the panic of leaving Terra Venture so quickly if the moon has survivable atmosphere? Trakeena is also crash-landed here and enters the cocoon again to emerge as something out of a bug's life.
Superhero landing. She gonna do a superhero landing. Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing! Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
She gets Terra Venture running again and attempts to crash it into the planet. The other Rangers head back to Leo's aid, but Leo is able to give the final blow. Only Terra Venture ends up crashing anyway, but the Galaxy Megazord reappears and is able to slow it down enough to not destroy everything. At the end of it all, it turns out that they landed on Miranoi, and the Rangers return the Quasar Sabers to restore those that were turned to stone by Furio. Kendrix even reappears, seemingly back to life, and everyone celebrates with fireworks that they just happen to have ready. Except all of those in the many outer domes, the majority of the crew, and definitely all of the horses on the horse ranch are most likely dead. Other than that, it's a happy ending. Although Bulk and Phononymous survive, so there's that. Well, that was something. Whether it was something good is not so easy to say. There's glimpses of great stuff in this season, but a lot of it was just infuriatingly confusing. I think the bottom line is, Lost Galaxy could have been fantastic if it were a miniseries, for example, but trying to get 45 episodes out of it ultimately meant that there was just a load of nonsense that kind of ruined it. It also feels like they tried too hard to use Japanese footage, when realistically they didn't need to. If they'd stuck to the Aliens-inspired aesthetic, ignored trying to shoehorn in Japanese footage, and spent the budget on 15 to 20 episodes instead of 45, with maybe commissioning some bespoke monster and Zord footage from Japan, like they did with Zoo 2, then it could have been brilliant. I get that you need the Zords because they sell the toys, and perhaps they may not have been set up to shoot that in the US, so that means having to use Gingaman footage. But look at what they get when they shoot their own bespoke monster footage. But then that's contradicted by the fact that it seems that they were able to shoot it in the US, or at least get some bespoke Megazord footage from somewhere because it appears in the crossover episode. I mean, they even go back and shoot new Astronomer and Ecliptor footage once they had to change up the storylines to include Karone. They could have gotten away with using the bare minimum of Gingaman footage, or commissioned or even shot some bespoke Mega Ranger footage to really sell the transition into this new way of doing things, seeing as Gingaman wasn't completely filmed yet anyway, and really created something cool, but sadly they didn't, and we end up with just glimpses of what could have been. Even the stuff with Captain Mutiny was mostly new footage, so I guess I just don't understand what it was that they wanted to get out of this season. After all, the best bits are the ones that don't even require that much stock footage. I stand by what I said in the previous video. If they'd siphoned off the Psycho Ranger arc into another series, it would have been much stronger, and I think that even more now. At times, Lost Galaxy is really good, building on stuff from In Space and taking inspiration from Star Trek, Aliens, and Starship Troopers, but then the filler episodes just feel like they're from a completely different show. And that's because they're from Gingaman. Despite the fact that they throw so many concepts at the show, even having a new Pink Ranger to write content for, they still manage to run out of ideas and even have to do a clip show before the season is over. If you watch this show when you were younger, I think your memories of it will be very different depending on what episodes you watched. When you try to balance the space exploration side of things, the Mother Nature-based aspects from Maya, retconning the end of In Space, and trying to cram in Japanese footage, it just doesn't work. You end up with a hot mess. One small thing though, I do appreciate how they managed to stick to the concept of the Lights of Orion only working when all 5 Rangers are together. They actually go out of their way to make sure this is kept consistent throughout the show, but that just makes it even weirder that there's so many other things that don't make sense at all. But one of the most frustrating things about it is that the Lost Galaxy from the title of the show only appears in 8 episodes and is mostly redundant to the main story arc. Not to mention one of those episodes is just a clip show anyway. Why would you name the show after something so insignificant? The entire Lost Galaxy segment just feels like it was shoehorned in anyway because they got a fresh dump of Gingaman footage once the series wrapped. Power Rangers Journey to the New World or something along those lines would have made much more sense. The Lost Galaxy is just filler episodes. We don't know where Miranoi is exactly, but crucially it's not in the Lost Galaxy. But anyway, that's Lost Galaxy done. I understand it was always going to be hard when you try and change things up, but still I feel like it was a missed opportunity. But seeing as they tried so hard to squeeze in all the bits of Japanese footage that they could, it must have been because Gingaman was brilliant. Right? In a somewhat different start to what we've seen so far, Gingaman starts by talking about the significance of Earth's nature, and then a mutant acorn appears to the sound of the original PlayStation logo. This is apparently Bok, or Boku, and he's able to travel through what looks like an invisible wall of some kind to a place called the Galaxy Forest, or Ginga Forest, depending on what translation you're watching. The locals are preparing for a festival, whereby the cycle of the stars is complete, and the Star Beast swords are to be inherited by new warriors. With it, a formidable beast will also be awoken. But these aren't all normal humans. They have Earth powers that they've trained for and that they're able to call upon. So before we even start, they're technically already superheroes regardless of whether they take on the powers of the swords. The warriors have already been chosen, but there's one, Ryoma, who wasn't chosen, as his brother Hyuga was more competent with his powers. When picking berries for the festival, Ryoma and Boku fall through the barrier into the outside world. Meanwhile, the others are receiving their swords, with each having powers from a different earth element. Hyuga becomes the warrior of fire, Hayate becomes the warrior of wind, there's probably a fart joke in there somewhere, Goki becomes the warrior of water, Hikaru becomes the warrior of lightning, and Saya becomes the warrior of flowers. Hence the colour scheme for these rangers: red for fire, blue for water, yellow for lightning, pink for flowers, and green for wind. There's definitely a fart joke in there somewhere. Once they've received the swords, they're told to climb to a nearby mountain to retrieve their Ginga bracers. We then receive the background story of the forest. 3,000 years ago, the Earth was invaded by space pirates called the Barban. A combination of 5 fearless warriors and the Star Beasts was able to seal the Barban beneath the sea. But now, the Barban are freed and we're introduced to Sanbash, who we would recognise as Villamax, and Shalinda, who has my attention, as well as Batbass and Iris, who are also both part of the Captain Mutiny arc. There's also Budo, who we saw at various points in the series as a servant of Scorpius, the ubiquitous pirate putties, or Yatato, Bucrates, who was Kelgar, Villamax's sidekick, and finally Zahab, who we would know as Captain Mutiny, and whose name is a play on Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. Already that is a lot of villains to introduce when we're only 10 minutes into the first episode. Zahab releases them to cause chaos throughout the planet, destroying buildings and stealing treasure. The Rangers, although I suppose they're not technically Rangers in this series, they're more warriors, jump aboard their horses and head to the mountain, bursting through the barrier as they do so. They fight their way through the pirates using their Earth powers, but Hyuga is forced to sacrifice himself to protect his brother Ryoma, and eventually ends up falling to his death in a crack in the earth, but passes on his sword at the last minute. Well, that sounds familiar. The Ginga braces appear to them, and the 5 perform Galactic Rebirth to become the new generation of Gingaman and beat the bad guys into submission, and so they retreat back to their ship. As a side note, like in the original Mighty Morphin series, the Yellow Ranger is male in Gingaman, which means the Yellow Ranger in Lost Galaxy has no skirt, even though that's usually the case for female Rangers, although this was retconned in Super Megaforce. The ship just happens to be a castle on the back of the Titanic monster. Titanic. The space pirates have been travelling through the universe, destroying planets and turning them into jewels. The Earth, however, is the one jewel that they covet more than anything else. They must revive the monster in order to achieve this goal. To do this, they must fill it with energy, and each of Zehab's minions offers up a monster to lead the attack, inevitably causing a squabble amongst them. Not unlike in Jetman. Rather than fighting each other, Zehab has them draw cards to see who attacks first, and so Elvis Lobster makes another appearance. This is interesting because it offers another way of explaining away the old Power Rangers and Sentai problem of why not just send all the monsters at once? It's kind of what we saw with the Psycho Rangers and Neji Rangers too. They're incapable of working together, and so you end up with the Monster of the Week. And besides, at this point, they don't really want to destroy Earth anyway. The Titanic must be awoken first in order to turn it into a jewel, so they obviously wouldn't go for an all-out attack. It's not really something that Power Rangers bothers to explain very often, but we've seen it a few times now with Super Sentai, and this is one of the better explanations so far. Shalinda rips through the Galaxy Forest barrier and attacks the village, but the villagers are no helpless bystanders and fight back, with the Elder having a few tricks up his sleeve too. She attempts to steal the forest's energy, so the Elder turns the forest into stone to lock the energy away. That also sounds familiar. As such, the warriors are forced to flee the forest before it sinks below a lake, but the Elder passes something on to Boku before he also flees. When the warriors reach the city, we see some battle footage that we would recognise from Power Rangers, although it makes a little more sense here, as it's just an actual city on Earth. However, rather than the monster being able to make itself grow, a barber extract is used, which was presumably cut out of the US show because it looks too much like he's downing a bottle of alcohol. In fact, the US show clearly shot a whole new section of the sequence with a green potion instead. However, it is interesting that they bothered to explain that the monsters only become giant as a last resort, as it shortens their lifespan. In fact, this is repeated almost every time a monster grows. This has never really been explained in Power Rangers up until now. The growth of the monster brings the return of the Star Beasts, and oh god, it's back! The Gingolian tells Ryoma to climb aboard and combine their Earth powers to burn the Elvis Lobster into obliteration. Boku reappears and gives the warriors the charm from the Elder, and seeing as the forest has disappeared, a young boy called Yuta and his father offer to let the warriors stay at their friend's riding club, which explains the out-of-place horse ranch in Power Rangers, as the warriors end up working at this ranch throughout the season. Yuta and his dad are actually present throughout the whole series, but while Yuta is generally a nice kid, he treats his bumbling dad like shit. But either way, he actually plays quite an important role in a few episodes. The charm apparently contains a seed. When they plant it, it immediately grows into an enormous tree that turns out to actually be like the TARDIS, and it contains a command centre of sort within the tree itself. Only this tree has a face and can talk. This is Moku, the Tree of Wisdom, and acts as our mentor figure as he's able to gather information from trees all over the world. Meanwhile, Sanbash is named Field Commander of the Barban, and they head into a series of episodes where they try various ways of gathering different types of energy to try and revive Titanic. To be fair, this is actually the majority of the series. As another side note, the warriors apparently have the power to turn night into day, and also apparently have their own basic weapons like a slingshot, dart shooter and boomerang, although these don't come up very often. Episode 5 is somewhat similar to Episode 4 of Power Rangers, where the weapons are stolen. In the Sentai version, a dark sword is broken, so a weapons collector monster is brought in order to gather enough weapons to melt down and create a new one, not that he thinks too much of Earth's weapons. He sets his sights on the Star Beast swords and manages to steal all 5, including Ryoma. But he also mentions partners of the swords, the Kiba blades. As in Power Rangers, Bukto doesn't want to melt the swords, instead he wants to add them to his collection, but they're 5 weapons short of what they need. Bukto refuses to follow orders, and Ryoma is able to break out of his chains and steal them back. He too pulls the old switcheroo with some dummy swords created by Moko. When they don't work, Sanbash tries to throw the Kiba blades into the furnace, only for the warriors to steal them back. They're also able to transform into their alternative modes, the Kiba Cutter, Kiba Shot, Kiba Claw, Kiba Knives, and Kiba Arrow. When combined, they form an even more powerful weapon called the Raging Kiba Wheel. Episode 6 also resembles an episode of Power Rangers. While Lost Galaxy adds its own spin about something occurring on Terra Venture, They're more or less the same premise, with a monster releasing a poisonous gas. It's weird that, at least at this early point, we have two shows that are very different, and yet also quite similar. Even some of the filler episodes follow similar themes, like an episode where Blue Ranger is meant to film the captain's daughter roller skating, only to fall for the instructor and end up filming only her, followed by a charming misunderstanding over a wedding, while the love rival turns out to be her brother, all whilst a monster causes earthquakes. That concept is pretty much mirrored exactly in Gingaman, only with Ginga Blue falling for Yuta's teacher after his father can't attend a Parents' Day, but still with a charming misunderstanding over a wedding, while the love rival turns out to be her brother and a monster causing earthquakes. Although in Power Rangers she just disappears and we don't see her again, at least in Gingaman she reappears throughout the season. Although, oddly, the actor that played Kyusuke in Car Ranger reappears as a love rival in a couple of episodes. But it's not actually Kyusuke, it's someone completely different. Anyway, back to the story. As in Power Rangers, the Star Beasts are turned to stone when their power is drained, removing the gas. This time, a jewel given to Yuta by Gingaleon, combined with the power of the Kiba Blades, is required to revive them. However, both the Star Beasts and Moko claim that the power is too dangerous to yield, as it's essentially a condensed star. In the end, it's actually Yuta who saves the day, as the Barben try to steal the energy from the stars as it's reviving the Star Beasts. He ends up throwing his jewel at them and destroying their weapons, just as the Star Beasts are revived. With the new power, they're able to turn into their mech forms, or silver forms in this version, which are able to form a giant mech called Gingayo. Like in the US show, it mixes traditional special effects with CG, which they continue throughout other parts of the series, presumably as some could easily be a person in a suit, such as the gorilla, whereas the four-legged beasts are a little harder to pull off when they're being played by actors. In episode 12, Sanbash appears and, wait for it, Hyuga's not dead. He was apparently recovered from an underground cave by the Barben. Sanbash informs them that they need to get back to the cave to uncover the Galactic Light. This would be our Lights of Orion equivalent. Only those with Earth power can open the cave, and apparently Hyuga no longer has it. Ryoma opens the cave and uncovers the light, but as in the US show, it was a bluff, and it's really a monster that's able to steal the light for Sanbash. Only the lights aren't there at all. Sanbash killed the man who told them where they are hidden, only it was a lie all along. In a final battle with Ryoma, Sanbash is destroyed. As such, Budo is made field commander and they head out in search of the Galactic Light, much like the search for the Lights of Orion. In the same episode, Moko is able to create new weapons called the Beast Strikers, which transform into the bazooka-like Beast Blasters. Episode 14 again mirrors an episode of the US show. In Power Rangers, Kendrix is forced to sub in for a famous actress that looks just like her when the actress fakes an injury. And then in Gingaman, Saya is forced to sub in for a famous actress that looks just like her when she fakes an injury. It's not until episode 17 that we get our first glimpse of the Black Knight, Bull Black, or the Magna Defender as we would know him. Supposedly, the Black Knight brought the lights to Earth 3,000 years ago to destroy the Barben, and has now joined the hunt to find them. And let's face it, he's pretty damn cool.
Cool guys don't look at explosions. They blow things up and then walk away.
It was apparently the Black Knight that Sanbash killed. He spent 3,000 years below ground, but the Barben have previous with him as they raided his home planet and killed his younger brother, as opposed to his son in Power Rangers. Side note, it's a Sentai, so obviously there needs to be a scene where a child is kidnapped and threatened with brutal murder. Frankly, I'd be disappointed if there wasn't. As in Power Rangers, the Black Knight has his own mech. He calls it a Star Beast, but it doesn't seem to have a non-mechanical form like the others do. Either way, this is Go-Taurus, and has the power to turn Black Knight Bull Black into Heavy Knight Bull Black. He's able to ride the mech into battle, although it's not afraid to fight for itself either. This is before the Knight-Beast fusion, and the combination of the two formed the Fused Knight Beast Bull Taurus. Episode 20 mirrors the episode in Power Rangers where everyone is frozen, but Ginga Red avoids it due to his fire-based earth power, rather than the dog tags in the American show, which makes much more sense. Episode 22 also mirrors a US episode, with it essentially revolving around Saya and Hikaru fighting because Hikaru ate a cake Saya had made for Hyuga's birthday. even though he's absent at this point, but that makes Saya's anger more poignant than in the US show. Eventually the Galactic Light makes an appearance, and it's tested on one of Budo's generals, only it wasn't Budo that ordered it, it was Iris's daughter, who has plans of undermining Budo and making Iris the new field commander with the help of Bucrates, who just happens to be her uncle. Budo is then treated as a traitor and is set to commit ritualistic suicide for his failure. Kids show. Of course, the light eventually fails the general, but seeing as the warriors would rather see it destroyed than in the hands of a vengeful Black Knight, it chooses to empower them, enhancing them just as the lights of Orion would. However, in Power Rangers, there are multiple lights, whereas in Gingaman, there's just one that splits into 5. So it makes more sense that in this version you would need all 5 warriors together in order to use the power. I don't understand why you'd split it up in Power Rangers. The light can also be later used to create the Radiant Armor Gingayo. Iris is then made field commander, but Budo escapes and starts ruthlessly murdering people. Where has all this come from? He also gets his revenge on Iris's daughter for her deception, with some pretty well choreographed swordplay. To be fair, Budo's actually quite a good character, but ultimately with nowhere else to go, he ends up fighting to his death with Ginga Red. But that's not important right now, because what is important is Hyuga's not dead. Again. The Black Knight wasn't quite killed by Sanbash. He fell deep underground and remained there for 3,000 years as he didn't have the power to revive himself. Then, one day, Hyuga came falling from above and he managed to save him just in time, absorbing his earth power in order to revive himself. Anyone else getting deja vu? Hyuga lives on inside Bull Black and he's been fighting against his lust for vengeance. The spirit of Bull Black's brother appears before him and convinces him to leave vengeance behind him and sacrifice himself to protect the planet. He releases Hyuga and is promptly killed in his weakened state. But with his death, Hyuga is revived, and Ryoma feels that he should hand over the sword to his brother. Hyuga refuses, but with Gingayo and the other warriors in peril, Bull Black's sword appears to him, along with Go Taurus, and Hyuga becomes the new Black Knight. In episode 26, we get another mirrored episode, literally this time, with a monster that traps people in mirrors. This is actually quite odd to have this many things the same, and they do also adapt episode 27, where a monster is trying to steal young girl's youth in order to revive Titanic. But the US show has a noticeably less rapey vibe, with Trakeena going all Snow White and wanting the women of Terra Venture made ugly so she's the most beautiful. In episode 29, we're introduced to Bizonira, who we would know as Deviot. He's a weapons dealer that is brought in to provide a weapon capable of removing those that stand in their way. He manages to steal some earth power to revive Gigavitus, which is a carrier mech that contains Giga Rhinos and Giga Phoenix. However, Go Taurus and the Star Beasts refuse to fight them, as they are also Star Beasts, although they too only have mech forms, as they've been modified by Bizonira. But I don't quite understand, because they're actually made up of lots of constituent vehicles, but initially we don't see what they are. They immediately transform after leaving Gigavitus. Not that it helps when we eventually do see them. They're made up of all sorts of things, none of which are explained. This is about as close as it gets. But within an episode, they're transformed and back on the side of good. Not only that, but Gigavitus is able to attack in its own right, with Bizonira now becoming a pawn of Batbass. Episode 32 is another mirrored episode, with a love interest for Ginga Red, but she's kidnapped by a monster, so her dirt bike riding brother joins the fight to get her back. Much like in Power Rangers, where the Red Ranger has a love interest but she gets kidnapped by a monster, so her dirt biking brother joins the fight to get her back too. Like in the episode with Kai, they use Asian actors for the love interests and the brothers to try and make the stock footage match a bit better, even though they end up filming mostly new footage anyway. In the Japanese version, the only reason Ryoma has a motorbike is because the warriors combine their galactic light, giving it all to Ginga Red and producing this new machine. Generally they stick to being on foot or riding horses, which obviously is tricky for creating a show in space like Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. Eventually Iris is defeated too, and as Bucrates tries to revive her, the captain realises that he's more interested in Iris succeeding than the Barban, so is struck down and then thrown overboard, leaving Batbas to become the new field commander. Episode 37 mirrors the episode where the monster is able to adapt to fighting each individual warrior. But there are a few noticeable differences, as in this episode Bucrates re-emerges and tries to get Hyuga to fight for him, or he'll destroy an already injured Go-Taurus. It also has a gratuitous extreme close-up on Shalinda, which has nothing to do with the story, but you're welcome, dads.
He said it! He said it!
Bucrates forces Hyuga to consume a seed that would mean he loses his earth power and can never re-enter the galaxy forest. Although why this is necessary is never really explained. Together they forge the Night Axe in order to attack Zahab. Episode 40 mirrors an episode of Power Rangers, where an old warrior monster forms a temporary truce with Ginga Yellow, or the Yellow Ranger, as he wants to die an honourable death in a fair battle. The US show even shoots more or less a shot-for-shot remake of some of the scenes from the Japanese show. It's just the context scenes that are different. In episode 41, 9 episodes until the season ends, the Titanic monster is finally revived. Now this does resemble Gelmadix from the Mega Ranger crossover that we discussed in the last video, but technically speaking they're meant to be completely different. Although you'd be easily confused because Gelmadix appears in 2 different forms during that episode, and the Gingamen even confuse it for Titanic at the beginning. The Titanic monster is obviously incredibly strong. It better be after waiting this long to see it. But like in the US show, it begins to overheat in battle, and is forced to retreat. Although in Power Rangers they say it has something to do with the weight of the castle making him overheat, but in this series it's because Titanic had actually started to decompose, so it's not quite as strong as it used to be. Either way, the castle is removed from its back, but that becomes its weak point, and it's dead by the end of episode 42. After waiting for over 40 episodes, the Titanic was revived and then killed within 2. But the Barban aren't too upset about it, because the fragments from the exploded monster sink into the earth, rotting its core, meaning an earth monster could develop and spring from below the ground. So the next few episodes are dedicated to reviving that monster. But I'm a bit confused, because now they seem to want to destroy the planet. Wasn't the whole point that they wanted to turn it into a jewel, which is why they didn't try to destroy it from the beginning? And what happens if they do destroy the planet? Titanic was their ship. The castle can't travel through space without it, so the destruction of the Earth would surely also bring the destruction of all the Barban. So what exactly is their motivation now? In episode 47, Moku enhances the Beast Strikers, somehow, even though he's a tree. Although, to be fair, I don't really know how he made them in the first place. But it's needed as Bizarnira is thrown into his own monster growth serum and transforms into the predator-like monster that we saw in Power Rangers. The Earth monster finally makes an appearance in episode 48, but it turns out that the ooze has been corrupting the Earth, including plant roots. As a result of that, and using up most of his energy to upgrade the Beast Strikers, Moku dies with the warriors, Yuta and Boku around him. Zahab realises exactly what I just pointed out, that they have no ship and are being made to look like fools. Meanwhile, Bucrates is dying from his wounds that were inflicted by Shalinda, and he tells Hyuga how to kill Zahab before blowing himself up with a load of Yatatos, allowing Hyuga to escape. The Earth monster disappears for a little bit, so Ryoma follows a legend of a roaring mountain, which eventually forces the Earth monster towards him. Shalinda also reappears, but is swiftly killed by Ginga Green, but the combined Earth power of the 5 warriors, not including Black Knight, is not enough to destroy the Earth monster, who promptly eats Batbass and grows into a giant. So that just leaves Zahab as the sole surviving Barban, other than the many Yatatos, of course. Zahab attaches the castle to the now grown Earth monster, I guess in turn turning him into the new Barban ship. Hyuga manages to bring him down from the castle, but Zahab realises that he now knows his weakness. Meanwhile, the warriors and the Star Beasts all combine their Earth power to finally burn away the Earth monster for good. So now Zahab is stuck without a monster or a ship. He can't just destroy the planet, he needs to try and grow a new Earth monster first, and he's able to destroy the Night Axe, which was meant to be the weapon specifically forged to break the jewel of Zahab's heart. Ryoma convinces Hyuga that as long as he loves Earth, he will still be able to use Earth power, so the two combine their Mane of Fire to destroy his heart, the source of his power, and he's defeated with the obligatory explosion. With Barben destroyed, the Ginga Forest is able to return along with their people, and even Hyuga is able to return home too. Not only that, but Moku's seed is then replanted and is brought back to life within the forest, and also Goki is reunited with his teacher girlfriend. Although technically we already knew that Moku was going to live again and the Ginga Forest revived, because we'd already seen it in the Mega Ranger crossover. But speaking of crossovers, we do have one more, and that is the crossover with the next season, QQ Sentai Go-Go 5. Now, the previous crossover was a little difficult to understand because it actually aired at the end of the main Gingaman series, so the entire story had played out beforehand, meaning it was hard to gauge what was fully going on. However, with this one, its continuity was partway through the season, so perhaps we've got a little bit more of a chance with this one. The show starts with Ginga Red in battle with some shadowy alien-like figures, but we soon transition to daytime. So apparently our new Rangers are an emergency rescue team. At this point they're seaside rescue, a little bit like a less sexy Baywatch. Yuta turns up at the beach with the picture book that his dad finally managed to publish, which chronicles the story of Gingaman. But when the rescue team invites him to eat with them, he tells them that he's waiting for Ryoma. Ryoma turns up, but he's injured, and they're not scared to show blood in this show. A monster then turns up and... oh. Okay, this season is dark. The collective of monsters discuss who this new monster is, and apparently he's the firstborn son who was dropped into the darkness of hell after he was born and tried to kill his mother. He escaped hell and has been ruling over the dead. He's even able to bring these scream mask alien types from below ground. Well, this is different. He has plans of summoning the Dark Beast, but needs souls, so he lures people into a hotel room where they are then captured and drained of their blood as a sacrifice. Now it's more like a darker Baywatch Nights. The emergency team enter the hotel, with Gingaman dressed up too, to try and get people out and away from the monster, only by the time they reach the bloodletting room, some people have already died, being drained of their life force. Is this still a kid's show? The two Red Rangers blast a hole in the wall and send the monster flying, but the Death Minions are still around. Luckily, Hayate and Saya appear to save them, but the rest of the Go-Go 5 bad guys appear, so we get the inevitable Mega Morph sequence. Which, just a couple of observations, it's interesting that they haven't alternated back to having a Black Ranger for Go-Go 5, they keep the Green Ranger. And also, because they're a rescue team, their visors can actually change in darkness, and we can see that the helmets have built-in breathing apparatus. That's actually quite clever. But the Rangers' efforts are in vain as the sacrifice is fulfilled and the Dark Beast is revived, causing huge amounts of destruction, so they're forced to call on the Mars machines, which are rescue vehicles, similar to what we saw in the latter half of Car Ranger. But this embraces CG a lot more than the earlier seasons. The Mars machines aren't enough on their own, so Hyuga and Yuta go in search of the Star Beasts, reviving them from a resting place underwater, for reasons that don't appear to have been on camera. But Gingayo and the rest of them are quickly defeated, so the Go-Go 5 is infused with the Galactic Light to defeat the monster, and also somehow save some of the people from the hotel who were surely already dead. Oddly, they don't even seem to be distressed by what they've just been through. And that's it. Except it's not, actually, because this crossover is also used for the basis of the two-part crossover episode of the next season of Power Rangers, that being Lightspeed Rescue. And it happens at around the same point in the series as it does with Go-Go 5 too. So while it may be a bit premature, it's only right that we also take a look at that one. The crossover starts on Miranoi, with Leo retrieving a sword from the stone. He too has a battle with shadowy alien-like creatures, but it doesn't last too long, as the creatures then leave to go to Earth. So this is either meant to be in the future, or they've been really quick in building modern cities on a new planet. On Earth, a mother is dragged away by the shadowy figures and into a lab when visiting her husband at work with her daughter. The US show sanitizes things a lot here. They make the daughter older, and she's not actually kidnapped, it's just the adults. And they're not being drained of blood either, they're just shrunk down and captured into bottles. Although they are still stealing people's life energy, It's just a bit less blatant than it was in Go-Go 5. The life force is meant to be for Queen Banshira, the other monster's mothers, but actually is being collected for use by Trakeena, who is somehow still alive. The Rangers come across Leo, who's injured but not bleeding like he is in the Japanese show. He's come all the way from Miranoi, somehow, even though Terra Venture was destroyed and they were meant to be so far from Earth they could never make it back. He tells them about Trakeena, who they somehow know about, and the ghouls reappear battling the new Rangers, with Kai and Maya turning up to help the other Red Ranger keep the ghouls away from the young girl called Heather. The Red Ranger refers to them as the Lost Galaxy Rangers, which again makes no sense. They don't come from the Lost Galaxy, nor do their powers. The swords aren't from the Lost Galaxy, the Galactabeasts aren't from the Lost Galaxy, and neither are the Lights of Orion. They are the Quasar Rangers. Full stop. Let's normalise that, please. Apparently Trakeena wasn't killed, she was just returned to her previous form. She's now gathering the life forces to try and mutate again. The other monsters find out that Trakeena is really behind it all and plan to take her down, preparing a poison dagger. Meanwhile, Heather causes a distraction by pulling the fire alarm, allowing the Lightspeed Rescue and Quasar Rangers to enter the building dressed as firefighters. The two Red Rangers manage to take down the monster and are then joined by the green and pink Quasar Rangers to fight the ghouls. But this isn't Karone, this is Kendrix, who has returned to take on the powers of the Pink Ranger, even though it's Karone in Super Megaforce. But that's not necessarily an issue, as presumably anyone worthy enough to wield the Quasar Saber is capable of being a Quasar Ranger. An all-out battle begins when the other monsters turn up, and Trakeena is then able to mutate, but she's poisoned and turns into the epically scary monster from the Japanese show. The Lightspeed Rescue Rangers call on the Omega Megazord, again referred to as Zord despite no clear connection to Zordon, as well as the Galactabeasts, who the Rangers themselves say, but they're on Miranoi, although that clearly doesn't seem to matter as they're here now. Trakeena is eventually taken down when the Omega Megazord is empowered by the Lights of Orion, and somehow everyone's life force is returned to them and they're just all jolly spiffing now. The Quasar Rangers then head back to Miranoi, supposedly just using their jet jammers, which is a bit ambitious, but okay, I guess. And that's that. And you know what? Overall, I feel that Gingaman was okay, but Go-Go 5 looks terrifying, at least from the crossover anyway. I'm not sure whether that carries over into Lightspeed Rescue, but it does look like the US show is a bit more toned down than the Japanese show. In the end, it appears that Lost Galaxy was just torn between using the concepts in Gingaman and creating a space exploration show, and as such, the two never really work. It's almost like they took the majority of storyline concepts from Gingaman and tried to mash them into this Star Trek-style show that also needed to retcon things from the previous season. So it's just this weird melting pot that just isn't what it had the potential to be. A lot of the dumb stuff in Power Rangers is there because it was dumb stuff in Gingaman. Not to knock Gingaman too much, because I actually grew to like the series quite a lot. But it feels like, had they not had to somehow come up with a connection between Power Rangers and space, they probably would have just copied Gingaman for what it is, because these two seasons are easily the most alike from what we've seen so far. I do like the balance of characters in Power Rangers. Kai is the straight man and also the most trained, and also easily the best actor of the bunch. Damon has the knowledge of the Astro Megaship, even if he is the worst actor of the bunch. Maya has the knowledge of another planet and civilization, and can also understand the Galactabeasts. Leo is the reckless but passionate one. Kendrix is the book-smart one, and Mike is the strong, noble one. And also, I suppose, Karone is the redeemed one. But one thing I hate is the ridiculously cheesy music in the fight sequences that just goes on and on.
You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think you understand your predicament. Stingwingers attack!
I guess it does fit the more Star Trek-y feel of the show, but it's nowhere near as good as the metal soundtrack from the Mighty Morphin era, and it's especially annoying because they have a decent track to use as a basis that has a more rocky feel to it. This is in contrast to Gingaman, whose soundtrack is actually really good. The theme music isn't that great, and the weird Japanese take on American country music is odd, but generally speaking, it's really well done. Gingaman is often criticised for being boring, which, for the most part, is fair.
今まで何回しゃっくりをした？そんなの数えてないよ。9回だ。なんでそんなの数えてんだよ、龍馬。10回だ。その爆弾は飲み込んでから100回しゃっくりをすると爆発する。
And for having dull villains, which is also fair, with a few exceptions though. One being episode 15's Kimumon. I mean, when you have a villain that carries around a giant crack pipe who smokes everything in sight to see whether it's the galactic lights, you're bound to get good results. But to be fair, Gingaman's not bad at all. I was a little sceptical of it from what I saw in the previous crossover, but it's perfectly watchable. But the one thing it isn't is particularly memorable. Although Gingayo and Go Taurus are actually some of the cooler mechs I've seen so far in the series. But in terms of comparisons between the US show and the Japanese, this is one of the most similar, and it's far from being as crazy as I thought it would be after watching the Mega Ranger crossover. In fact, I can't actually fault it that much. It may not be one of the best seasons that I've seen so far, but it's relatively well thought out and well made too. And there's not a lot that doesn't make sense, at least within the weird world of Sentai anyway, whereas Lost Galaxy is riddled with things that don't make sense. But that's it. No video games or movies to consider. So, all in all, Lost Galaxy and Gingaman get kind of the same rating. They're okay, with Gingaman being the stronger of the two. There's great moments in each, but a lot of it just kind of passes over you. Certainly worth your time in lockdown, though. So, nothing left to do but sing us out, nameless Japanese crooner. しい影が大きくなったら大地にどっかり寝転んでみろよ涙が急に大きくなった